"We're implementing budget cuts, and your position has been eliminated," Simon said, shrugging dismissively and leaning back in his leather chair. "Thanks for everything, Granny." I sat across from him in his spacious corner office, stunned into silence. The certificate of completion for Chloe's training program was still warm in my hands. I had just finished presenting it to him, proud that I'd successfully trained the young intern over the past 4 months. And this was my reward: immediate termination. "Today is your last day," he continued when I didn't respond. "Human Resources has prepared your final paycheck and severance. 2 weeks' pay." My name is Alice Jones. I'm 59 years old, and after 7 years as the project coordinator at Brighton Urban Design in Boston, Georgia, I've just been fired. 7 years of ensuring every permit was filed correctly, every deadline met, and every regulatory hurdle cleared. All ended in a 3-minute conversation on a Friday morning over budget cuts. My voice was steadier than I felt. "Just this week, we secured the $35 million Riverside development project." Simon glanced at his expensive tie, looking slightly uncomfortable. "It's a strategic restructuring. Chloe will be taking over your responsibilities now that you've completed her training." Chloe Davis, the 28-year-old intern I'd been training since March, the one to whom I'd patiently explained everything about the maze of city regulations, contractor relationships, and permit applications, the one who had no actual experience in urban development, but boasted thousands of social media followers. "I see," I said, gathering my dignity around me like armor. "Will there be a transition period? The Riverside project has several critical permits pending." "That won't be necessary," Simon replied, already checking his phone. "You've done a thorough job training Chloe. She's up to speed on everything." I doubted that very much. 4 months of training couldn't replace 7 years of experience, let alone the 3 decades I'd spent in this industry before joining Brighton. But arguing would accomplish nothing. "Human Resources will help you clear out your desk," Simon added, standing to signal our meeting was over. "We've arranged for security to escort you out by noon." A security escort, as if I intended to steal office supplies or sabotage files after 7 years of loyal service. The indignity burned hotter than the firing itself. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said, rising from my chair with all the poise I could muster. It took every ounce of self-control not to tell him exactly what I thought of his strategic restructuring. As I walked out of his office, I saw Chloe waiting by the reception desk, excitement poorly masked by professional concern. She'd known this was coming. Perhaps she'd even orchestrated it. In that moment, I decided I wouldn't fight or scream. I would simply leave. They didn't know just how ugly this would get for them. 2 hours later, I placed the small box containing my personal belongings in the trunk of my car and sat in the driver's seat, finally allowing myself a moment to process what had happened. 7 years of dedication ended with budget cuts, Granny, and a security escort. I hadn't always worked at Brighton. For most of my career, I'd been at larger firms in Miami's development sector. But 7 years ago, when the housing market crashed and layoffs swept through the industry, Simon had recruited me specifically for my regulatory expertise. "We need someone who knows how to navigate the system," he'd said. Then someone with established relationships at the city planning office. Those relationships had been crucial to Brighton's growth from a struggling 5-person studio to one of Miami's most promising architecture firms. The Riverside development was their biggest project yet, a $35 million mixed-use complex that would transform the downtown riverfront. I'd spent months securing the preliminary approvals, calling in favors from contacts I'd cultivated over decades. I hadn't minded when Simon asked me to train Chloe. New blood was important in any company, and I enjoyed mentoring younger staff. For 4 months, I'd patiently explained every form, every deadline, every unwritten rule that made the difference between a stalled project and a successful one. "The trick with the zoning office is to submit on Tuesdays," I'd told her. "Harold reviews applications on Wednesdays, and he's much more lenient than the Thursday staff." Chloe had nodded, taking careful notes and asking thoughtful questions. I'd been impressed by her attention to detail and her eagerness to learn. I'd even defended her when other staff complained about her constant social media posting. "She's young," I'd said, "but she's working hard and learning fast." What I hadn't seen were the private meetings with Simon, the lunches they shared, the way she positioned herself as the innovative future while subtly painting me as the outdated past. I started my car but didn't drive away immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called my daughter Elizabeth. "Mom, aren't you at work?" she answered, surprised to hear from me mid-morning. "Not anymore," I replied, my voice finally cracking. "I was fired today." "What?" Elizabeth's shock and indignation were immediate. I explained what had happened: the sudden termination, the insulting severance, the fact that I'd been replaced by the very intern I'd trained. "That's age discrimination. You can sue them," Elizabeth exclaimed. "Maybe," I said, signaling to exit the parking garage, "but I'm not sure a lawsuit is my first choice." "What do you mean?" she asked, suspicious. She knew me too well. "Nothing," I replied innocently. "I just need to think." What I needed to think about was how best to remind Brighton exactly what they'd thrown away. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and my laptop, still processing the abrupt end to my career at Brighton. The shock had faded, replaced by a simmering anger I rarely allowed myself to feel. I wasn't just angry about losing my job, I was furious about how it had happened. The disrespect, the callousness, the feeling of being discarded like obsolete equipment after years of dedicated service. I opened a folder I'd maintained meticulously for years. Digital copies of every permit, every application, every approval I'd secured for Brighton's projects. I paid particular attention to the Riverside development files. What Simon and Chloe didn't understand, what they hadn't bothered to learn, was that these weren't just standard forms submitted through normal channels. 3 years ago, the city of Miami had approached me directly to help streamline their permit process for major developments. The city planning office was perpetually understaffed and overwhelmed by complex projects. Harold, the senior planning officer, had known me for decades and trusted my thoroughness and integrity. Together, we had developed a solution. I established Jones Regulatory Consulting LLC, which would serve as an official liaison between developers and the city. The arrangement benefited everyone. The city got a reliable point person, developers got their permits processed more efficiently, and I got additional income, plus the security of having my own business on the side. Brighton knew about this arrangement. In fact, it was one of the reasons they'd hired me. What they'd failed to grasp, or perhaps simply forgotten in their rush to replace me with a younger model, was that my company wasn't just a pass-through entity. It had real authority in the permitting process for the Riverside development. All the critical permits had been filed under my LLC's oversight, with my digital signature required for final approval. Without me, those permits were in limbo. I closed my laptop and sipped my tea, considering my options. I could sign off on the permits as a professional courtesy, allowing Brighton to proceed without interruption. That would be the nice thing to do. Or I could remind them exactly what they'd lost when they fired me. My phone buzzed with the text from Elizabeth. "Don't do anything rash, Mom. Talk to a lawyer first." I smiled. My daughter really did know me too well. The next morning, Saturday, I contacted my friend Victoria, who happened to be an employment attorney. We met for coffee at a quiet cafe downtown. "They can't just fire you because of your age," Victoria said, after hearing my story. "But proving age discrimination can be tricky." "I'm not interested in a discrimination lawsuit right now," I replied. "I want to know about my obligations regarding the permits filed through my consulting company." Victoria raised an eyebrow. I see where this is going. Let me be clear. If those permits were filed through your LLC and your signature is required for finalization, you are under no obligation to provide that signature without proper compensation for your services. And if Brighton assumed those services were covered under your employment, that would be their mistake." Especially if your consulting work was established as a separate business entity, she added with a small smile. Do you have documentation of the arrangement? I nodded, thinking of the folder on my laptop. Perfect, Victoria said. Let me draft a letter outlining your position. As I drove home from our meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm for the first time since hearing Simon's dismissive budget cuts, Granny. I felt in control again. Monday morning arrived with a flurry of missed calls and increasingly frantic text messages from Brighton. I ignored them all as I calmly went about my morning routine. Breakfast, crossword puzzle, a bit of gardening in the early spring sunshine. It was the first Monday in years I hadn't spent in a fluorescent-lit office, and I was determined to enjoy it. At 10:15 a.m., my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Simon or anyone else from Brighton. It was Harold from the City of Miami planning office. I decided to answer. Alice, thank goodness, Harold said when I picked up. We've got a situation with the Riverside permits. Brighton submitted a request for final approval, but everything's filed under your LLC. I can't proceed without your digital signature, I told him. My consulting company is the official liaison for that project. They say I'm no longer involved with Brighton, but that's irrelevant. The permits were filed through my LLC, and my signature is required. Harold paused before speaking again. I see. Well, this puts us in an awkward position. The city can't proceed without your sign-off, but Brighton is insisting we bypass you. That's not possible under our agreement, I said, already knowing the answer. No, it's not, Harold confirmed. The expedited process we established requires your verification. Without it, Brighton would need to resubmit everything through standard channels. How long would that take? I asked. He laughed. Months at minimum. Plus, they'd lose their place in line. After finishing with Harold, I checked my phone to find 3 more missed calls from Simon. The latest voicemail was notably different from his earlier messages. Alice, look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Can we please discuss the Riverside permits? Call me back as soon as possible. I smiled. The panic in his voice was unmistakable. He'd finally realized what my firing actually meant for his precious project. At noon, I received an email from Victoria with the draft letter she'd prepared for Brighton. It was perfect, professional, firm, and crystal clear about my position. Jones Regulatory Consulting LLC would be happy to complete the permit process for the Riverside development for a consulting fee of $75,000, approximately what I would have earned in salary over the next 9 months, plus formal credit as the regulatory compliance specialist on all project documentation. I approved the letter and Victoria sent it immediately. Simon's response arrived within minutes. A hastily written email demanding that I call him for an urgent discussion. I ignored it and instead drove to my favorite nursery, spending the afternoon selecting plants for my garden. I was examining tomato seedlings when my phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Hello, Mrs. Jones? This is Michael Carter. I nearly dropped my phone. Michael Carter was the principal investor in the Riverside development, a prominent businessman with deep pockets and a reputation for not tolerating delays. Yes, Mrs. Jones, what can I do for you? I asked. I understand there's an issue with the permits for Riverside, he said, his tone direct but not unfriendly. Simon Anderson seems to be having trouble explaining the situation clearly. I'd like to meet with you directly to understand what's happening. I agreed to meet him the following morning at his downtown office. When I returned home, I found an email from Chloe Davis in my inbox. The subject line read, "Please help." The message itself was both pleading and condescending. Alice, I know you must be upset about the restructuring, but holding up the Riverside project is only hurting your professional reputation. Please be reasonable and sign off on the permits. I'd be happy to include your name in the acknowledgments. Acknowledgments after being fired and replaced. She really thought I'd settle for a mere mention. I deleted the email without responding and went back to planning my garden. Tomorrow's meeting with Michael Carter would be interesting indeed. Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully for my meeting with Michael Carter, choosing an elegant navy suit I'd rarely worn to the casual Brighton office. I arrived at Carter Development's sleek downtown headquarters 15 minutes early and was immediately escorted to a spacious conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the very riverfront the Riverside project was meant to transform. Michael entered precisely on time, a tall man in his late 50s with silver hair and a reputation for blunt speaking. He shook my hand firmly. "Mrs. Jones, thank you for coming," he said, offering me coffee as his assistant served us. Carter got straight to the point. "I've invested $12 million in the Riverside development so far. Now I learn the entire project is stalled because Brighton fired the one person who could navigate the permit process. I'm not pleased." "I understand your frustration," I said. "Tell me about these permits," Michael continued. "Simon claims it's a simple paperwork issue that you're dragging out because you're bitter." I opened my laptop and showed him the digital trail, the initial applications, the preliminary approvals, the pending final clearances, all filed through Jones Regulatory Consulting, LLC 3 years ago. The city of Miami asked me to establish this arrangement to streamline the approval process for major developments. Brighton knew about it. It was one of the reasons they hired me, but they'd forgotten my consulting company was legally separate from my employment. Michael studied the documents. "Without your signature on these final approvals, the project can't move forward. Brighton would need to resubmit everything, which would take months." "And you sent them terms for completing the process?" he asked. "My attorney did," I said. "A consulting fee plus professional credit, that's reasonable. $75,000 and recognition as regulatory compliance specialist on all project documentation." Michael nodded slowly. "And their response?" "They demanded I call Simon for an urgent discussion, nothing addressing the actual terms." Typical, I thought. Michael tapped his fingers on the table for a moment, then made a decision. "Mrs. Jones, I'd like to make you an offer that bypasses Brighton entirely." I blinked. "I'm listening." "Carter Development will retain Jones Regulatory Consulting directly for the duration of the Riverside project. The same fee you proposed, plus a bonus structure tied to key regulatory milestones. You'll work directly with my team, not through Brighton." I forced my expression to remain neutral. "That's unexpected. That's between me and them," Michael said with a cold smile. "I'm reconsidering our entire relationship given how they mismanaged this." I left the meeting with a handshake agreement and instructions to have Victoria review the formal contract arriving that afternoon. When I got home, I found an elaborate flower arrangement on my porch with a card from Chloe. "So sorry about the misunderstanding. Please call Simon ASAP. We need you." I placed the flowers on my elderly neighbor's porch instead, knowing she'd enjoy them more than I would. Then called Victoria to brief her on the Carter Development offer. They'd match the fee we proposed to Brighton, plus performance bonuses, and I'd work directly with Carter's team. "Send me the contract when it arrives," Victoria said with an appreciative whistle. "Continue ignoring Brighton's desperate attempts to contact you." I spent the afternoon in my garden, planting the seedlings I'd purchased earlier. It was therapeutic, digging in the soil, setting young plants into place, imagining the harvest to come. A perfect metaphor for this unexpected new chapter in my professional life, planting seeds for future growth after being uprooted. By Wednesday morning, news of my arrangement with Carter Development had spread through Miami's tight-knit development community. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages from former colleagues, other developers, and even journalists seeking comments. Simon's desperation reached new heights. First came an email offering me an immediate consulting contract at twice the rate I'd requested. When I didn't respond, he left a voicemail. "Alice, please, we need to talk. Carter's threatening to pull Brighton from the Riverside project entirely. This could ruin us. Whatever you want, name your price. You can even have your old job back with a raise. Just call me." The panic in his voice was almost satisfying enough to make up for budget cuts, Granny. Almost, but not quite. At noon, Victoria called with an update. Carter's legal team had sent over the contract, and she'd reviewed it. It's very favorable, much better than anything Brighton could offer. For starters, it's not just for Riverside. Carter wants Jones Regulatory Consulting retained for all his development projects in Miami for the next 2 years, with an option to renew. The fee structure alone gives you a comfortable 6-figure income, plus those bonuses we discussed. And Brighton's role? I asked. That's the interesting part, Victoria said, her voice smiling. The contract includes a clause giving Carter Development the right to select or reject any architectural partners. There's no guarantee Brighton will remain involved with Riverside, let alone any future developments. I signed the contract that afternoon, feeling a strange mix of vindication and melancholy. I hadn't set out to destroy Brighton. I'd given them 7 good years, but they'd made their choice when they decided I was disposable. By Thursday, the situation had evolved dramatically. I received a call from Harold at the city planning office. Alice, you won't believe what's happening. Simon Anderson has been calling every hour, trying to find a way around the permit requirements. He actually suggested we update those dinosaur procedures for the modern era. I laughed. I assume that went over well. About as well as you'd expect, Harold chuckled. The planning director reminded him those procedures ensure public safety and compliance. He then asked if Brighton was officially rejecting the expedited process we established with your consultancy. Simon backpedaled pretty quickly after that. Later that day, I met with Michael Carter and his project team to begin the transition. As we sat in Carter Development's sleek conference room, Michael made a surprising announcement. I've decided to terminate Brighton's contract for the Riverside development. Their mishandling of the permit process demonstrates a lack of professional judgment I'm not willing to risk on a $35 million project. I asked about the architectural plans they'd already completed. We retain ownership of all plans and specifications, he explained. I've reached out to Hartman and Associates. They'll take over and honor the existing designs with minor modifications. Hartman and Associates was Brighton's biggest competitor in Miami. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael continued, turning to me with a smile. Let's discuss how to get this project back on track with your expertise leading our regulatory compliance efforts. I'm confident we can make up for lost time. As the meeting progressed, I felt energized by the challenge ahead. At 59, I'd been dismissed as irrelevant, a granny whose experience no longer had value. Now I was a key consultant on Miami's biggest development project, working directly with one of the city's most influential investors. Sometimes being fired is the best thing that can happen to you, especially when they have no idea what they're losing. The headline in Monday's Miami Courier News business section said it all. Carter Development drops Brighton from Riverside project, cites permit mismanagement. The article detailed how the $35 million project would now proceed under new architectural leadership, with Jones Regulatory Consulting handling all regulatory compliance. There was even a quote from Michael Carter, "Experience and relationships matter. We've brought in Miami's best regulatory compliance specialist to ensure this project proceeds smoothly for the benefit of the community." Best of all was the small photo of me standing with the Carter Development team at the permit office, my digital signature finalizing the very approvals that had been in limbo the week before. I saved a copy of the newspaper alongside the termination notice Simon had handed me just 10 days earlier. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. From fired with a paltry 2-week severance to featured in the business section as a key consultant on Miami's most significant development project. Elizabeth called shortly after the article was published. "Mom, you're famous," she exclaimed. "I just heard that Brighton is in complete disarray." "Oh," I replied, trying to sound merely curious rather than satisfied. Apparently, they'd lost 2 other clients concerned about their ability to navigate the permit process without me, and Chloe had been reassigned to social media strategy after failing to submit a basic variance application. I couldn't help but smile. Social media strategy was exactly what Chloe was qualified for, not the complex regulatory work Simon had foisted on her. "It's not just Riverside," Elizabeth continued. "Michael Carter has 5 other projects across the city, and word is he's taken all of them away from Brighton. That's millions in contracts." "No, Mom," I corrected gently. "It's not karma. It's just the natural consequence of undervaluing expertise." 3 months later, I stood at the Riverside groundbreaking ceremony, watching as Michael Carter and city officials ceremonially turned the first shovels of dirt. My role had expanded beyond regulatory compliance. I was now Carter Development's liaison with the city for all their projects, a position created specifically for my unique combination of expertise and relationships. As photographers captured the moment for local news outlets, I spotted a familiar face on the periphery of the crowd. Simon Anderson, looking decidedly less confident than when he'd fired me with a dismissive, "Budget cuts, Granny." Our eyes met briefly. Before he looked away, his discomfort evident. After the ceremony, a reporter from the Miami Courier-News approached me for an interview. The resulting article, "The Permit Whisperer: How Alice Jones Became Miami's Most Sought-After Development Consultant," ran on the front page of the business section. It detailed my decades of experience, the respect I commanded from city officials, and the critical role regulatory compliance played in successful urban development. There was even a quote from Harold: "Alice knows more about Miami's zoning and permit requirements than anyone in the industry. Developers who work with her get their projects approved in half the time." My consulting business expanded rapidly after that. I hired 2 assistants, experienced women in their 50s, who'd been similarly pushed aside at other firms, and established an internship program specifically for people changing careers midlife. I never sought to damage Brighton, but I watched with detached interest as their fortunes declined without access to my expedited permit channel. Their projects faced delays, and several clients followed Carter Development's lead, taking their business elsewhere. Simon's youthful approach hadn't delivered the results he'd promised. Chloe lasted 6 more months before leaving for a marketing position at another firm. I wished her well. She was young and had time to learn that flash without substance rarely succeeds in the long run. As for me, at 59, I had embarked on the most rewarding phase of my career, not as someone's employee, but as the architect of my own success, building a business that valued experience, embraced wisdom, and never ever dismissed someone as just a granny.